Tim Strabbing. Tim is a graduate of the Naval Academy and also worked doing this kind of fellowship work at the Naval Academy for 5-6 years?
3 years.
3 years.
Yep.
So he's got really strong experience with this, and he's going to be helping us out, sort of helping us out work with students to develop their applications, figure out how we're going to apply, where we're going to apply, and to help actually develop those applications in such a way that we can win. And so I say we, it'll be you who wins, it won't be us, but it's nice for everybody.
Everybody wins.
So I want to introduce him, and Tim's going to talk about the basic scholarships that are available to you in your sophomore year. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Great.
And he's going to talk about these things. I'm going to sit in the back and take notes.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Well, nice to sit with you here this afternoon and talk about this. I've got a few slides I can show you that give you the facts about the scholarships, but maybe like a little bit of philosophy around why to apply for these kind of difficult national scholarships. And Katie K mentioned a good one, right? Like, it's great to win and get scholarship money, right? But I think there's something more sort of about this process that's valuable, right? So have you guys applied for scholarships before? So you have experience with that. These type of scholarships, these national competitive scholarships, tend to be a little bit different than maybe some scholarships you applied for when you were a senior in high school trying for college, or ongoing ones. For one, they have a real high value on you having a vision for what you want to do in your life. And that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do when you're 19, 20, 21 years old. So this gets to kind of some of the value of going through the scholarship application process for these, is that it really will push you to think more broadly outside of just not even the scope of your major, not even the scope of theoretical professions as a psychologist and as a doctor or a psychiatrist or whatever you're thinking about in terms of career things, but really thinking more about society and the world and how your narrative fits into that, and what type of issues keep you up at night, or what kind of things do you go down, these rabbit trails in the internet thinking about, like, oh, if I could get at this problem or this issue, how would I solve it? So these scholarships are really looking to invest in people who want to be impactful in their careers and in society, and that takes some time. Like, that's not something that you can just sort of say, after we have this meeting, go sit down in a cubicle here in the library and write for 20 minutes, and you're going to have a clear idea of the impact you want to make on society. So, but I'll say the process of going through that is, in some ways, the secret behind the whole thing. If you win, it's fantastic, right? It's great. Everybody will celebrate. It'll be a wonderful thing. But there's real value for you as students and aspiring professionals to go through that process of self-examination about what are your gifts and talents, what skills do you have, what are you passionate about, and what's that need in the world, what's the need in society or community that you really want to get at. And the scholarship process is a wonderful way to try to distill those things. So when you're a rising junior, and I'll walk through these, there's three main scholarships. And there's kind of two categories. There's the Truman, which is kind of a category by itself because it's for, and I'll flip that slide real quick, for the Truman. I'm going to come back to that in a second. So for the Truman, this is for postgraduate study, for graduate study, for up to 3 years. So generally it's for a master's degree. In some cases, they'll put it towards med school. It's pretty rare that they'll allow it to go towards an MBA, but I don't think either of you are thinking about that. The other piece that's neat about the Truman Scholarship is that it really is sort of a community and a cohort. So, for example, the current class of juniors, I think there were 59 selected this year. They'll go out to Missouri to the Truman Library and spend a week doing like a leadership institute in May or June. And then after their senior year is complete for Truman Scholars, they have what's called like the Summer Institute in DC, where through the Truman Scholarship Foundation, they align students with internships in Washington, DC that align with their interests that they want to explore for careers and that kind of thing. And then they do more cohort development and that type of work with the Truman Scholarship. So it's like one of these things where it becomes kind of a community that you build, not only with your peers who across the nation who've won that scholarship, but there's also a really rich alumni network and base that supports the scholarship and supports the scholars. And chances are in that network there's people who've done maybe not the same things that you're interested in, but similar enough where it's really helpful to have those kind of conversations. And so like mentorship is kind of built into the scholarship. The big thing about the Truman Scholarship is an emphasis on public service. So you really have to connect what you're thinking about doing in life to public service. And that may be in government, maybe in a nonprofit, maybe in a clinical or hospital setting. In a stretch, maybe it's in a Fortune 500 company, but probably less likely. You need to have a real compelling vision around that. So it's public service emphasis. And I think they even have a clause that, when you take the scholarship money, that if you don't do a certain amount in public service after the scholarship, you actually have to pay it back. So they're pretty serious about that. And then institutionally, Wayne State can nominate up to four students for the Truman Scholarship. Okay, I'll pause on that. We can come back. Any specific questions about the Truman right now? Does that make sense? I'm going to come back to some things about it because the Truman application is its own, of all these scholarships, it's its own unique animal. They've honed it over the years. They have a real process of how they go about it, and I want to plant some seeds in your minds if you think you might want to apply for the Truman, because if you wait until next September or October to start thinking about some of these things, it'll be too late to be able to really put them together well in an application. Okay, so that's Truman post-grad up to 3 years, or for graduate study, I should say. And then there's two scholarships that I just want to highlight for you that go towards undergrad study. That is, and this one's both for sophomores and juniors. The Goldwater, and so it's $7,500 a year. There's more offered annually, 300 instead of about 60 with the Truman, but it's STEM limited. And then the last one I want to highlight is the Udall. In some ways, this is a little more restrictive if you look at the discipline. They're looking for environmental studies, so something you want to do with the environment, or something with Native American leaders, or looking into Native American issues in terms of research, like if you really want to do clinical psychology and Native American reservations or something like that. So it's a little narrower, 50 annually, and again, it's for undergraduate, so like 7,000 a year for undergraduate. And so let me flip back to those previous slides, and we'll kind of have a broader discussion here on a few things. So I won't gloss over it. These scholarships can be a lot of work to apply for, like tens of hours, and certainly for, we'll say, the Truman application. I think the cohort we worked with this last year, probably the average person spent between probably 50 and 100 hours, if not more. Don't you think, KDK?
I think so, easily, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a lot of effort, but it gets to this idea of outside of the classroom, just working towards a grade on your transcript, but really doing some personal and professional growth around who you want to be and what you want to work towards. The good news is a lot of the heavy lifting that you would do in a Truman application or Udall or Goldwater will be transferable into a grad school application. So if you both know you're going to do graduate work pretty shortly after graduation, the type of thinking and writing you're going to do for these scholarship applications will transfer, into a med school application or a psychology PhD program or something like that. It might not be a one-for-one fit, but you'll see that there's themes. They want to know about leadership. They want to know about service. They want to know about your own sort of personal vision and passion for how you want to make an impact. And so maybe you're front loading the work a little bit, but actually it'll help you because you'll be able to refine it more as you go along. And then just, broader kind of basic professional life skills of being able to communicate well, both in written and oral form, thinking creatively about your fit in the world, and as you think about disciplines you want to work on, analysis, that kind of thing. So that's a little bit sort of the sell of this is why it's worth doing that much work. Let's talk a little bit about the scholarship criteria. This is a broad brush, but it fits pretty well for Truman, Udall, Goldwater, but also Rhodes, Marshall, Gates, the bigger scholarships that you can compete for your senior year. So academic excellence, so they're looking for GPAs generally 3.7 or higher, and even there weighted more towards like the 3.9, 4.0 realm. Does it mean that if you've got a 3.7 or 3.8 you won't be competitive? Not necessarily. It's just you would need other components of that application to really shine to help you compete against, frankly, the 4.0s at Harvard that you'll be competing against, because there's people here in Michigan who, crushed it in high school or whatever and got into Harvard, and they're going to come back. It's done regionally, so you'll compete against people you're both from Michigan, right? Yeah, you'll compete. For the Truman, it's a Michigan-based pool. They interview at the University of Michigan. But the challenge is not like it's just you compete against Michigan and Michigan State and Grand Valley and that kind of stuff. You compete about anybody who, home of record, grew up in Michigan can come back and compete for scholarships. So it's a challenge, but they got nothing on you guys. Okay, so intellectual curiosity. This comes down to, are you able to move beyond what you've been doing for your classwork and be really a curious person about the world and what's going on around you? And part of the intellectual curiosity is it'll be a given that they'll expect that whatever thing you are passionate about, psychology or medicine, that kind of thing, that you can speak well to that. But there's also a well-roundedness component to this where, especially if you get to the interview stage, they'll want to ask a question like, what did you feel about Julia Assange getting arrested today? Which was
arrested today?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember. I didn't see the news all day. Wow.
That was the headline in the New York Times when I read earlier. But there's an expectation that you're engaging with the world around you, even though that Julian Assange doesn't really have anything to do with working with children in a clinical setting or being a doctor kind of thing. But they expect that you're aware of what's going on in the world around you. And so that's part of the intellectual curiosity. There's a well-roundedness about that you're conversant on a broad number of topics. Now, they're not going to expect you to understand the nuances of international law of why Julian Assange was able to be taken from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. But they're going to want to understand, like, hey, why did that happen? Why is that controversial? How did that, how does this blow back from the 2016 election? Those kind of things. Next one's a real big one, and is something that, again, can't really be done last minute, right? So this idea of leadership qualities. Are you engaging in opportunities to exercise leadership in your life? Is that within the context of Wayne State? Is that with community organizations? Is that with a nonprofit, a place where you're exercising your faith? There's all kinds of ways that leadership can be displayed, but every single one of these scholarships puts a high premium on leadership ability and leadership potential. And so they're going to ask you, for example, the Truman application has one of their most important questions is, give us a specific example of a satisfying leadership role you've had, something along those lines. It's not the exact word for word, but so they're asking for that, and they actually put a fair amount of weight on it. And so this can be hard when you're kind of sophomore, junior year. Maybe you haven't had a lot of opportunity to exercise that. If you haven't, we can talk more specifically about it, Q&A and that kind of thing. Think about specific examples, things you get involved with if you're not yet. But that's important to them. And they want a demonstrated track record of sort of genuine leadership engagement. And that doesn't mean you've got to be, the class president of your class here at Wayne State for them to value what you've done. But it needs to be something where it aligns with something you were interested in, and you've taken initiative and you've made a positive contribution on an issue or a topic or an organization that's meaningful to you. Compassion, sort of that gets down to this: do you have a desire to make a difference for those around you? And how does that translate? How does that work into kind of your vision and your narrative around vocation and purpose and passion in life? But they want people who have really thought through and have a degree of passion and vision for how they can help those who are in need. And that doesn't mean that, you're going to go serve the local food bank this weekend to check that box. It's more of a general sense across the application that this is someone who's aware of the complexities of the world and the state of inequality and human suffering, and and this gets back to the Truman aspect of public service. You're developing a vision for how you're going to impact that and influence it. And that's kind of the last point. You have a vision. How are you going to put all these things into motion? And so, yeah, that's the general criteria for these scholarships to think about. Few things here that wasn't on a slide that's worth thinking about. They all require letters of recommendation, and it varies for each scholarship how many they require. The Truman requires 3 letters: a letter that substantiates your public service, a letter that substantiates your leadership, and a letter that talks to your academic and sort of research goals. So that's the Truman example of it. Like leadership and public service things, you can't rub the bottle of the genie in September and make letters of recommendation that are really good sort of appear out of thin air. So good letters of recommendation come from people who know you well and know what you're interested and passionate about. Most likely they're going to be professors, but it could be, in this case, for the leadership one, something outside, but someone who knows your leadership well. And so think about those relationships you have, because sometimes people could have, I've seen students really high, quality vision, great grades and all that kind of thing, but they've been kind of an island unto themselves for a variety of reasons and haven't built any relationship with adult mentors and adult mentors and that kind of thing. And so when the letters come back, and it's pretty easy to see, like, it's clear that the letter writer doesn't really know the applicant very well, and the letter is just sort of like, it drags on the application in a way. If you have a thought in your mind that you might apply for the Rhodes and the Marshall and the Gates, the Rhodes scholarship that says up to 8 letters, but in my experience in the Naval Academy, we didn't have a Rhodes winner with less than 6. So at least 6 letters. Most of ours winners had 7 or 8. So, and that's if you could run through your mind to find 8 people who would write you a letter of recommendation, you've got time, right? Like, this is why we're kind of having the conversation now when you're sophomores and early in your junior year, right? Like, that's a heavier lift on the letters of recommendation. And you want to give plenty of lead time for your letter writers too, because that makes a big difference in the application. So you can look at this for the Truman, the Udall, and the Goldwater. We'll have an internal application due a little bit after you get back from the summer, and I'm not sure when we'll send an email, I guess, when it goes live. We've got the framework
probably
for
that
it.
second week of September.
Okay. Yep. And then
Then you got the September 9th. I think that's what we were talking.
That's what we were talking.
That should be a good day.
Yeah. And then internally we'll sort of huddle around depending on how many applications are there, and then as it makes sense to slot people for scholarships, we'll work towards the institutional nomination. So Wayne State as a university, for you to apply for these scholarships, has to institutionally endorse you to do it, essentially. So a letter from the dean describing why that Wayne State's endorsing you for the scholarship. And then the actual scholarship applications, like the Truman is due the first week of February, and then Udall and Goldwater are a little bit after that. So, but again, it gives us time with that initial application in September to kind of work with you and work through things. Yeah, maybe I'll hit pause there and see if you've got questions or reactions or thoughts about what the opportunity is, what the work is, clarification on anything.
What do you think?
No questions for me personally.
So, okay, I have a question. So you said this would be like for like post-grad, like after undergraduate
Yeah.
for the Truman?
Yep.
So like it would be like, I think it said like three years, so like it would fund like your first 3 years. Like you said that it might not go for med school or anything.
KDK, do you remember Truman in med school? I feel like it's almost Truman much prefers to pay for like an MPH than a MD.
I think so. That's been we've talked to them a little bit about this. They're looking for, so they're the two are looking for very different things. So the Goldwater will accept people who are thinking about med school, but they really, really want people, if they're going to do that, who are going to do MD PhDs.
Yeah.
Like a straight up MD, they're just not interested. Like it's got to be a straight. You've got to have a combination of research. We've had two pretty plausible applicants. They haven't gotten it, but we've had two really good applicants who did great jobs using their lab experience. Have you had lab experience?
I am in a lab right now.
Yeah, so you're in a lab. So that's precisely the kind of experience they're looking for. I think whether it's psych or not, as long as you're in a lab and you're working on psych-related stuff, especially is it sort of micro or macro? Like, are you looking at sort of more biomedical stuff or more kind of socio-psychological stuff?
Right now I'm in a psychology lab.
Okay, got it. What does the psych lab do? Like, what do they work on?
It's on like close relationships, so it looks at like familial relationships. I'm in a lab right now that looks at like kids who have asthma and their relationship with like their families.
Okay.
Mostly their guardians.
Got it. That's going to be
Maybe
iffy for those. So if you're interested, we'll have to do a little more digging on that because that's right on the line. Like the asthma stuff, is the kind of stuff they will fund, but the fact that it's primarily the psychosocial stuff that sort of takes it a little bit away. But if you're thinking of doing broader kind of societally related stuff, public health related stuff, then you're certainly right in the ballpark for the Truman.
For Truman, yeah.
Yeah. So that really works. What about for you, Dennis? I mean, what?
I haven't gotten to a lab yet, but I'm trying to get into a lab with Deegan-Krause for child development. So
Okay.
that's what I'm working on right now.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So what about the broader, for you, the broader sort of social kind of public affairs stuff or public service stuff? Does that ring true? I mean, can you see yourself in a kind of public service related career?
That's really a hard question because I can't really.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know what that kind of looks like.
So,
can you give me an example?
yeah, let me talk. What about for you? Do you have a sense of what like that would look like in your kind of field? Like what a public service stuff would look like?
So I'm thinking of like I'm 90% on the pre-med track.
Okay.
Probably towards psychiatry.
Okay.
Because like, I'm a psych major.
Right.
But right now that's my interest.
Okay. Okay. So what they're looking for are the kind of people who will go off and who will work at a level that goes beyond the individual patient. And you correct me if I'm like they're looking for people whose goals exceed that kind of direct patient care to talk about something that deals with the broader kind of societal questions. So that would mean work that would look like, maybe it's medically based, but it involves working with or leading a nonprofit. It involves advocacy or lobbying. It involves sort of professionally related stuff. So, some academic jobs qualify in this. Certain kinds of research positions qualify in this. I mean, I would guess sort of a goal, sort of do NIH, National Institute of Health stuff or something like that would probably qualify in some of this. What they're not looking for are they're looking for people who can sort of say, there is a social problem out there, there are things in need, and I can do something that will affect that broader question. And so that's the kind of question. This isn't for everybody. So if it's not going to fit for you, then that's totally fine. For certain, you don't want to try and shoehorn it in because they can tell, they can smell that. So
So I mean, I think it's a good way to put it, KDK, in terms of beyond just the sort of patient or clinic level. It's looking at a policy or system level or structural level around issues and problems and opportunities.
Right.
And so it's kind of getting up into those next levels. And this is the other thing I should say about these applications. It can be challenging at your age to sort of what I would akin to, if you know baseball at all, with like Babe Ruth pointing for his home run. Like when you're writing these scholarship applications, you can feel a little bit like Babe Ruth because you're projecting your future self that Dennis is going to transform the way that clinical psychology happens for small children across the United States because he scaled it through the Head Start program, or something like that can feel like Babe Ruth a little bit. But the thing you have to do is just think about it being a plausible future self. It's almost like we're giving you license and a framework to dream about. If you could think about the world around you unconstrained by resource and opportunity, this is the impact you'd want to make. And you want to have a degree of sobriety and humility about that, but you also want to say, hey, I think I could really do significant things in this world if I was given this opportunity. And I really do want to make these type of impacts. And I think that's the tension that you'll navigate through it. But I guess what we're encouraging you to do at this stage in the game is to dream big. Think broader beyond the coursework you've been taking. Think broader beyond sort of the world you maybe have been experiencing, and push out a little further and start thinking at more on that structural, systemic, policy level around things, and see if something grabs you there.
Right.
And if something does grab you there, then that's certainly on the Truman front and the Rhodes, Marshall, Gates front, like that. That's a good fit for what those scholarships are seeking to do for students.
That's right. I mean, one of the things that we've done, and actually we found this to be a useful exercise, whether you apply for these things or not, they're looking for the kind of people in all of these scholarships, the kind of people that when you die, the New York Times, whatever the New York Times looks like in 70 years, will write a story about, right? And it'll be like, Dennis transformed the way America dealt with child mental health or something like that. We didn't say you have to do that, but that's what they're looking for. And the idea is envision your own obituary in a sense. Envision your own. I've got a class where I'm asking my students to write what their resume or their CV looks like when they retire. Envision like the biggest self, like the self with the most impact on the world, and that's the self that we want to help cultivate, and that's the self that they want to look for. And so in sort of thinking about what could you do, like think big, imagine big, and think about it as, I'm here at Wayne, but if I had this, if I had, 3 years of Truman funding, and I had a cohort of people who were also movers and shakers, I could do something major. And that's what we're asking you to sort of think about. And so they're going to ask you to answer questions like, the Truman in specific is going to ask a question. It's going to ask you to say, give us a policy proposal. Like a little, you had 1,000 or 1010, right? So think of the 1010 thing that you did. You had 1010 as well? Did you? So think of I'm sorry, I should know you all, like I should know everybody by face, and I just don't. But there we asked you to sort of look at the world and say, what do you want to work on? What do you want to solve? So the Truman is actually, we didn't design it this way, but is actually asking you the exact same thing. Like if you could write a policy that changed something, what would that be? What would that? And they're asking for something very specific. So, for example, one of our students last year wrote a proposal where he said, any research that's federally funded should have the obligation of revealing its funding. Or revealing its findings. Excuse me.
Transparency findings. Yeah.
Revealing its findings, everybody. So if you get money to run a drug study and you find that the drug doesn't work, that should actually be part of what's revealed, so that other people don't go back and do the same study, or other people are doing other stuff. So it's a very concrete, it's a very small thing, but it would have really big effects. We had another, a couple of other students. I'm trying to think. So
water policy.
Yeah, one worked on sort of state level water policy about testing schools for lead. We don't do that right now. I mean, we do it in the places where it's suspected, but it turns out there's lead problems in schools that aren't suspected, so that the Grosse Points, where no one thought there was a lead problem, have a lead problem that they discovered by accident. So who knows what other schools have lead problems. So the idea is you're telling the state, you need to do this and make this happen. So it's the idea of finding one specific policy and sort of thinking big about what that would do. And that somehow ties into your bigger profile of who you are as a person and kind of where you want to go with this stuff. I don't know if any of that rings sort of for you guys, if that's kind of the stuff you'd be interested in. If it is, what we'll do is over the summer, we'll be in touch with you and we'll sort of make sure we get your emails and we go back and forth. We'll be in touch with you, encourage you to fill out a kind of rough draft online. And then at that September deadline, we'll run through those, we'll look through those, and we'll pick probably the 8 people or so. I mean, or some people who we think are really promising. We'll work with you for a while to develop, and then we'll make a further cut. And then the 4 that we pick will go on, and those will be our nominees for the national level. So that'll be the kind of process for that. And then for sort of juniors, and if you can wait, in a few minutes we'll do the when you're a senior related thing, what that'll look like. But a lot of those other scholarships are very, very similar. They don't have the policy proposal like Truman does, but they have something that's related. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts about this?
So it's like more, the scholarship's more like based on like what you like say, like what you write about. It's not based on experience, really.
There's a little bit of experience. Like they're looking for a track record.
Yeah.
I think why don't you talk more, because you actually had winners on this. So.
I think they're looking for someone who's demonstrated high potential, right? So academically, in terms of leadership, in terms of service, and just, in terms of general impact in the world that they're a part of. And so the resume portion of it does matter. Like in the Truman, you list, your top, I think 5 activities that you've been involved with. It gives you a chance to talk about high school activities as well. So yeah, there is a resume component to it, but resumes don't win scholarships. And that's it's almost like in this realm of competition, it's assumed that you have a very high GPA, and it's assumed that you have a resume that sort of walks on water. That's the entree to essentially have the application seriously reviewed, and then they're looking for really kind of that special vision and passion that we can't do. KDK and I can't do that for you.
Right.
That's where you as the student.
That's right.
And that's when we'll be able to tell if that's starting. And this isn't something that I would say, oh, you've got to tell us today this is the thing. But what happens is students sort of have their eyes sort of opened or their horizons broadened on this. Really amazing things start to percolate to the surface of what you're interested in, what you think about. Because the cool part about this process is that you're not getting a grade. Nothing's going on your transcript. This is about you and self-discovery and introspection. And when you start to do that, some really cool things can start to happen inside of you and your engagement with the world and that kind of stuff. And that's why it doesn't matter if you win a scholarship or not. If you go through that and have that self-learning take place, we all win.
And I've had a bunch of students say, I never thought about that before. I never thought about what I was going to do after law school. And stuff like that. And that's really our goal in this. Like, if it were just about winning a scholarship, we probably actually wouldn't do this, right? Like, we wouldn't, maybe, we would, but if it weren't good for you also, if it weren't part of part of this nutritious breakfast, right, we wouldn't focus on it so much. But the idea is the gift is the application process. Right, the winning scholarship is just like the reason to give any people the incentive to go ahead and go through it, but it is a kind of formal way of doing it. But yeah, so when you say experience, they're looking for somebody. They're about to invest between $30,000 and $80,000 in you, so they're looking. They want to know that they're going to get your resume, your life so far is their security that they're investing this money well. So, and there's not a lot you can do to change that right now. Like at this point, there's not a lot that that's going to sort of radically alter that. It is kind of who you are, and but we can help you develop that, and we can actually help people realize that there are things in their life that actually tell that story in a way that maybe you wouldn't have thought about. So we do a lot of asking questions, like, so tell us about this, tell us about that. Like, oh, you know what? That's actually a big deal. Like, you probably want to mention that.
Yeah.
That was what,
Absolutely.
what Tim was doing through the whole process. Like, I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can work really well. So yeah.
So we can like go back all the way to like high school when we were like our actual like talking about what we've done as leadership roles and stuff like that.
So you'll be able to list back into high school in terms of activities and groups and clubs you've been a part of.
You can just go
But for that leadership example, like for specific to the Truman now, it's really got to be something from college.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It doesn't matter like some like transfer students like doesn't matter like what college you came from.
Nope. Absolutely not. In fact, my sense is that Truman for sure has a very positive view towards someone who did 2 years of community college and then came your route essentially does. Yeah, that's not a problem at all. Good. What else?
I don't know, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah. It is a lot. What I would encourage you, like the Truman website in particular, they've tried to make I think sometimes with these scholarships there can be a little bit of it's shrouded in mystery a little bit because it's like kind of a black box process in terms of how selection happens. Truman in particular has tried to make it much more transparent, and there's sample applications on there. They'll say here are the good elements of a response about public service or leadership. They really, if you spend some time on the Truman website, it might, you'll educate yourself on what the scholarship's about, but you'll also see some other examples of people doing the work we're talking about, of really thinking about their skills, the match of their skills and their passions, and articulating kind of a vision of how those might change the world or impact the world around them.